Have you ever noticed that the people you give the most to are often the ones who see you the least? Not because they're cruel, not because you're invisible, but because you never taught them where you ended and they began. There's a strange kind of pain that doesn't arrive like betrayal. It grows like mold, quietly, in the background. You become the reliable one, the helper, the giver, and slowly you start to wonder why the phone only rings when something's needed. Why your time, your energy, your care are taken, not valued. You think it's love, you think it's loyalty, but it might be something darker. You may be boundaryless. Most people think of boundaries as fences, cold, rigid walls built to keep others out. But that's a dangerous half-truth. The real purpose of a boundary isn't rejection, it's revelation. Boundaries reveal who respects your energy and who consumes it. They show you not just where you stand, but where others fall. This is the boundary paradox. Limits don't trap you, they free you. Because when everything is allowed, when nothing is protected, when your time and energy are always on tap, you become a utility, not a person. In this video, we're diving into the deeper psychological truth behind boundaries. Not the Pinterest self-help version, but the shadow work that Carl Jung warned us most people avoid. We'll explore the internal architecture of why we let people cross lines, why saying no feels like betrayal, and how reclaiming your limits is often the most radical act of self-love. You'll learn why chronic people-pleasing isn't kindness, it's survival, why disappearing quietly may be more powerful than confrontation, and why your suffering might not come from being too sensitive, but from being too available. We'll break down the invisible contracts you sign every time you say yes when you mean no, the secret psychological cost of not being appreciated, the silent power of emotional withdrawal, the mirror method, how to reflect back what people give you without drama, and how your mind, like a temple, needs walls to hold sacred ground. If you've ever felt taken for granted, this isn't just information, this is a ritual, a cinematic initiation into the sacred art of drawing the line, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Boundaries don't mean you love less, they mean you finally understand what your love is worth. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you swallow your needs to protect someone else's comfort, you are signing a silent agreement, an invisible contract. It says, I will not disturb the peace. I will not take up too much space. I will be what you need, even if that means disappearing. Most people never read the fine print. They don't know they've signed it, and they certainly don't realize that over time, that agreement becomes a cage. This is how people become background characters in their own lives. At first, it feels harmless. You offer help before being asked. You listen when no one else will. You say yes because saying no feels cold. You extend yourself, emotionally, energetically, until self-sacrifice starts to look like generosity, until exhaustion starts to look like virtue. But slowly something changes. You begin to notice how little is returned. The same people who lean on you vanish when you need them. The ones who expect your support seem to forget you have a life, or feelings, or limits. And when you finally hesitate, when you pause before offering, before showing up, before stretching yourself thin, something strange happens. They don't thank you for all the years you gave. They get annoyed that you stopped. That's when the truth clicks. They weren't loving you, they were consuming you. Carl Jung warned that what we don't bring into the light of consciousness will rule our lives like fate. That invisible contract? It's written in the ink of old wounds, childhood dynamics, early programming, trauma disguised as helpfulness. You thought being needed meant being loved, but being needed is a job. Being loved is a choice. Here's the paradox. You taught people how to treat you, and now they're simply following the script. This isn't about blame, it's about revelation. You didn't choose to be undervalued, but you may have chosen to stay silent. You may have thought patience would earn you respect. You may have believed that unconditional support would eventually be reciprocated. But boundaries aren't barriers to connection. They're filters for truth. When you draw a boundary, you're not pushing someone away. You're asking a question. Will you still see me when I stop giving? Some will vanish. Let them. Some will notice. Pay attention to those. Because those who remain, those who pause and say, "Hey, are you okay?" They're not just worth your time. They're worth your trust. If this message is hitting something real in you, if you've been living on the edge of your own life, subscribe. This space is for people like you, people who feel deeply, think critically, and are finally ready to stop being taken for granted. Not all boundaries are broken by force. Some dissolve in the name of love. You were probably taught in subtle ways that kindness means self-erasure, that good people are selfless, always available, never angry, always forgiving, that being generous is more important than being whole. But here's the truth. Some kindness is a disguise, a mask stitched together by fear and obligation, a way of keeping peace outside while a quiet war rages within. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the unconscious part of us that holds the traits we repress to survive, and for many of us, that shadow contains anger, self-respect, assertiveness, and the quiet scream, "I matter too." You see, chronic people-pleasing isn't a personality trait, it's a survival strategy. Maybe you learned that saying no made love go away, that having needs created conflict, that voicing pain made you a burden, so you adapted. You gave, you smiled, you softened your edges until there was nothing left to protect. And at first this works. People like you, you're easy to be around, you're non-threatening, they come to you for help, advice, attention. But what they're really coming for is access. Access to your time, access to your emotional labor, access to your willingness to carry what no one else will touch. You become a convenience. And when you finally try to pull back, when you whisper a quiet no, or just take one step towards self-preservation, you get labeled cold, selfish, distant. Because people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always see your self-respect as an attack. That's the shadow at work. You repressed your needs for so long that they come out sideways. Resentment, passive aggression, burnout, emotional numbness, and even then, you blame yourself. You tell yourself you're not trying hard enough, not good enough, not kind enough. But what if your exhaustion isn't a sign of failure? What if it's a sign of awakening? What if the anger you feel when you're ignored is sacred? What if the sadness when you realize someone doesn't value you is actually your soul reasserting its worth? To integrate the shadow, as Jung taught, is not to get rid of our darkness. It's to make it conscious, to bring it into the light. And in the realm of relationships, that starts with one radical act. You stop giving what you no longer have, not to punish, not to teach a lesson, but because your energy is sacred, and you're no longer offering it to those who refuse to honor it. In this chapter of your life, your boundary isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Some boundaries are drawn with words, others are drawn with absence. There comes a point when talking no longer works, when you've explained your feelings a dozen different ways, offered chances, extended grace, and still find yourself unseen. You begin to realize something sobering. The people who consistently cross your boundaries are not confused, they're comfortable, and what they're most comfortable with is your silence. This is where sacred withdrawal begins, not as punishment, not as manipulation, but as a final act of self-respect. You stop showing up first. You stop checking in. You stop initiating plans, conversations, emotional CPR. You step back not with rage, but with reverence for yourself. And then something very revealing happens. Some people don't notice you're gone. They simply redirect their energy elsewhere, as if you were never more than a station they passed through. For them, your value was proximity, utility, convenience. Their silence in response to your absence is not rejection, it's revelation, a mirror held up to what the connection truly was. But others, fewer, Rarer will notice. They will feel your absence like a missing limb. They'll ask where you went. They'll fumble for closeness. Some will be sincere. Some will be panicked. Not because they love you, but because they lost the supply of attention, advice, or forgiveness they depended on. This is where your discernment sharpens. Carl Jung once wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. Sacred withdrawal isn't about isolation. It's about refusing to participate in conversations where your inner truth has no place. Instead of performing closeness, you retreat to the edges. You observe, you allow the relationship to breathe or to suffocate on its own terms. You'll feel guilt. That's part of the process. The part of you trained to believe that withdrawal is cruel will start to panic. But stay with it. Let the silence speak. Let your absence become a boundary that requires no explanation. This isn't about playing games. This is about healing the part of you that thought proximity was the only proof of love. That if you weren't always present, you'd be forgotten, rejected, abandoned. But listen, if your absence erases the connection, then your presence was the only thing holding it together. That's not love. That's labor, and you are no longer available for emotional unpaid internships. Sacred withdrawal is not silence as surrender. It is silence as sovereignty, a way of saying, I will not fight to be seen anymore. Either you already see me, or I am no longer standing here. You are not disappearing. You are becoming precise with your energy. Let them come find you, or let them fade. Either way, you return to yourself. And if you're still here, if something in this silence speaks to something unspoken in you, subscribe. What happens when you stop overgiving and simply give back what you receive? Not more, not less, just a reflection. That's the mirror test. One of the simplest, most revealing boundary strategies, and one of the most confronting. You're not punishing, you're not ghosting, you're mirroring. You're showing someone exactly what their presence, effort, and attention look like in your life by matching it. If they reach out once a month, so do you. If they're emotionally distant, so are you. If they cancel last minute, you stop rearranging your life for their schedule. At first it might feel cold, but what you're actually doing is collecting data. Real, unfiltered, emotional data. Because the truth is, people are often very consistent. It's us who keep projecting potential onto their patterns. When you stop making excuses and just reflect their behavior back to them, it becomes painfully clear. You were carrying the relationship, they were simply riding it. Carl Jung taught that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the reverse is also true. Everything we tolerate from others can reveal how little we expect in return. The mirror test flips that script. It forces you to ask, what happens if I stop compensating for their indifference? If I stop being the emotional overfunctioner? If I stop performing worthiness? What happens is this: either they rise to meet you, or they fall away. Sometimes people get angry when you mirror them, not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've disrupted the unspoken agreement. You were the one who always made it work. You softened the tension. You filled the space. You were the emotional janitor. And now you're holding up a mirror. They don't like the reflection, so they blame the mirror. Let them. Because the mirror test is never really about them. It's about you finally getting honest. Finally breaking the illusion that if you just love harder, try harder, give more, things will balance out. They won't. Not unless both parties are carrying equal weight. And here's what's remarkable. When you start mirroring instead of overfunctioning, you make space for new kinds of relationships. People who naturally meet you where you are, who don't need you to shrink so they can feel big, who don't drain you to feel full. You'll start to feel something you haven't in a long time: emotional symmetry, equal give and take, conversations that nourish rather than extract, relationships that feel like resonance, not rescue missions. The mirror test doesn't just reflect the other person, it reflects the truth you've been avoiding. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Not all boundaries are drawn between people. Some must be carved deep within. These are the inner boundaries, the psychic membranes that separate thought from feeling, fantasy from reality, ego from shadow, and self from everything that threatens to swallow it. Without them, you don't just lose relationships, you lose yourself. Carl Jung understood this well. He called it the temenos, a sacred inner space, a psychic container where transformation occurs. In ancient Greece, a temenos was a walled sanctuary, marked off from the chaos of the world. It was where one approached the divine. Jung believed we each needed an inner temenos, a psychological safe zone where we could confront the unconscious without being devoured by it. This isn't metaphor, this is architecture. Because without internal boundaries, your ego, the part of you that says I am, has no structure. And without structure, the psyche becomes porous. Everything leaks in. Everyone's emotions become your burden. Every projection becomes your identity. Every internal conflict becomes external chaos. You become reactive, dissociated, overwhelmed. This is what happens when you can't tell where you end and the world begins. Not just physically, but psychically. Jung saw this in patients overwhelmed by their dreams or tormented by archetypal images they couldn't integrate. In those lost in obsession or spiritual mania. He noticed that the psyche, when under siege, often created its own defenses, mandalas, circular drawings with a clear center and boundary. These weren't just doodles, they were survival maps, symbols of an inner structure trying to reassert itself. The circle says, there is a self, there is a center, and there is a line you may not cross. This isn't rigidity, it's protection. When you meditate, journal, or practice stillness, you are building your temenos. When you turn off the noise of the world and listen to your own inner voice, you're reinforcing the boundary between self and chaos. And when you choose not to absorb the emotions of others, not because you don't care, but because you're not a container for other people's unprocessed pain, you are honoring your psychic perimeter. The modern world punishes this kind of inner boundary. It calls it selfishness, detachment, coldness. But the truth is, those who lack inner boundaries often collapse under the weight of everything they've taken on. They burn out, they explode, or they disappear entirely into roles they never chose. Your inner boundaries don't make you less compassionate, they make you sustainably human. Because just like a house needs walls to feel safe, your psyche needs lines, not to keep the world out, but to make sure your soul has room to grow within. There's one boundary that terrifies people more than any other. It's not saying no. It's not confronting someone. It's not taking space. It's leaving, not slamming the door, not making a scene, but the quiet, deliberate act of saying, this no longer serves me, and I'm not shrinking to make it work. Letting go is the final form of clarity. By the time you get here, you've probably tried everything. The conversations, the silence, the mirror, the hoping, the justifying, the mourning of what you thought the relationship could be. And still, the pattern repeats. You feel unseen, unheard, unheld, not because you're asking for too much, but because you're asking the wrong person. There's a strange nobility in how we cling to the people who hurt us. We tell ourselves it's loyalty, compassion, patience. We believe that if we just endure a little longer, they'll finally understand. They'll wake up. They'll meet us halfway. But often, they don't. And Carl Jung would remind us, what we do not make conscious, we are doomed to repeat. Letting go isn't just about protecting yourself from another person. It's about breaking the inner pattern that needs to be tolerated in order to feel worthy. You were conditioned to stay, to fix, to understand everyone else's pain, even while yours was ignored. But boundaries aren't just about staying safe. They're about setting yourself free. There's a dignity in the quiet exit, a sacredness in walking away without a final argument. When someone has shown you, again and again, that your presence is optional, but your effort is expected, it's not your job to stay and teach them how to love you. It's your job to love yourself enough to stop teaching. You'll feel grief. That's normal. You're not just letting go of a person. You're letting go of a hope, a version of you that thought if you just tried harder, you'd finally be enough. But here's the paradox. Leaving isn't abandonment, it's a homecoming. Because when you walk away from what drains you, you walk back into what sustains you. You return to your energy, your focus, your joy. You make room for people who won't need to be convinced of your value. Think of your life like a book. Some characters are only meant for a page, others a chapter. Only you decide who gets a permanent place in the story. Leaving doesn't mean you failed. It means you listened to the silence, to the shadow, to the voice within that finally whispered, "We're done here." A boundary is not a wall. It's not a punishment. It's not the absence of love. A boundary is a sacred line drawn to protect what is sacred within you. You started this video wondering why being good, helpful, loyal, and kind still left you feeling unseen. Why giving your best kept attracting people who gave you less. Now you know. Freedom requires form, and your form, your shape in the world is defined by your boundaries. We've walked through it all. The invisible contracts we sign when we confuse self-sacrifice for connection, the shadow of kindness, how people-pleasing is often unresolved fear in disguise, the sacred silence of withdrawal that speaks louder than words, the mirror test that reveals what people truly give, the inner temenos, the psychic boundary that protects your soul's architecture, and finally, the hardest boundary of all, walking away not in anger, but in peace. So let's leave you with 3 simple, difficult, essential truths. You teach others how to treat you by what you tolerate. If you keep showing up for people who disappear, they will keep disappearing. If you keep explaining your worth, they will keep questioning it. Silence is often louder than confrontation. Stop arguing for your own visibility. Step back. Those who truly see you will step forward. The rest were never meant to stay. Self-respect always feels like loss at first. But that ache in your chest, that's not loneliness. That's detox. That's the pain of no longer betraying yourself for temporary belonging. Boundaries don't end relationships, they reveal them. They don't close you off, they clear the room. They don't isolate you, they align you. And here's the paradox. The more clearly you define where you end, the more clearly others can see where they begin. Boundaries don't push love away, they give it a place to land. You are not cold, you are not selfish, you are sacred. And the line you draw today just might be the beginning of your actual life. Thank you for watching. If this journey spoke to you, if it put words to something you felt for years, subscribe. You're not here by accident. You're here because you're finally ready to draw the line. And I'll be right here where the edge meets the awakening.